all of you for waiting at this rather long day. It's my honor to welcome you for this session on Biodiversity Acknowledged, which is part of a knowledge program being led by HIVOS and Oxfam Novib. We are thankful to IIED and PUC for hosting this event. Actually, I'm standing in for Edith Van Welsum, who was supposed to chair this session. Edith is a dear friend and a mentor who unfortunately couldn't make it because of a personal emergency at home. Nevertheless, we have a set of very eminent speakers who have years of experience of working around these issues. And I think without much ado, I would like to invite the first of the speakers, who is Andrew Mushita, who is Director of Community Technology Development Trust from Zimbabwe, to make his presentation. I think it's rather at the end of the day, so although each of the sessions would focus on agrobiodiversity in some way or the other, the question for us is not to emphasize why biodiversity is important. I think everybody in the room would agree that it is important for the resilience of the planet. We've done years of work around these issues, but the real questions are, if it is important, how do we make a step change? What are the knowledge gaps that we need to plug? How do we use the knowledge gaps to make biodiversity visible in policies? And how we can use our experiences, the best practices, the learnings over the years to scale up these experiences to bring about transformative changes that are required. So with that, I think I hand it over to Andrew now to make the first presentations. After that, we will have 3 more, and I request you all to hold on to your questions till after all the presentations are over, and then hopefully we'll have a very good, engaging discussion. Over to you, Andrew. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good evening. I'll try to make a synopsis of some summary of a presentation on the issue of agrobiodiversity. As we know, it's a broad issue which involves policy, technical, economic, and livelihoods kind of implications. As we know, agrobiodiversity is the lifeline of human survival. Without it, then we are not able to survive. So, in that sense, maybe you get the next one, yeah. I think I will try to link it from also agrobiodiversity with the practical work we are doing as an organization. And in this sense, we have maybe four interventions which we are working on with respect to agrobiodiversity. And we look at it from the food security kind of perspective, as it provides food security to most of developing countries' farmers. And then also environmental management, which is mostly related to the agroecological kind of aspects. And policy and advocacy, as we know that agrobiodiversity is also regulated at a global level with a number of multinational environmental agreements, like the Convention on Biological Diversity, the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture, and also the Nagoya Protocol, which is on access and benefit sharing. And all these international instruments are primarily focusing on regulating agrobiodiversity. In our work, this kind of we have 2 kind of strategies which we try to facilitate maintenance and management of agrobiodiversity. Through community seed banking by farmers, the smallholder farmers we are working with, and also the strategy of putting up community seed banks, which then allow communities to manage their agrobiodiversity within their local conditions. As you know, agrobiodiversity is location specific also, and it does have a lot of, farmers have a lot of knowledge in terms of managing it, how to utilize it, how to preserve it, and so forth. But also it's a resource which is under threat from the monoculture agriculture systems, which are really pushing for a one-size-fits-all agriculture system. And agrobiodiversity is under threat because of that. also from climate change as well. It is also facing a lot of challenges and pressures. So it's not a resource which is just there if we are not going to manage it and manage it well. So in that sense, we emphasize so much crop diversification, on-farm agro-biodiversity conservation and sustainable use, on-farm research and use of community seed banks as repositories of crop germplasm, on-farm seed production, distribution and supply. And as we know, communities are at the front line of climate change. These are the people who are facing or interfacing with climate change. And as a result, they are also co-generators of new technologies. So they are not only recipients of technologies, but they are also generating a lot of information, a lot of doing on-farm research in terms of characterizing their own germplasm which they have, in terms of improving them through participatory plant breeding, and also developing their new varieties which are adapted to the local conditions and climate changes. And here is just a picture to show you the kind of, we do also organize seed fairs. And the seed fairs are meant to actually showcase the kinds of varieties or the diversity which farmers do have, which they depend on in terms of their crop production. And this picture shows you just small grains. It's a wide diversity, and this we use it also to exchange the varieties which they have, to exchange the knowledge, to exchange the seeds, so that they can also increase diversity. In some areas where high potential agriculture is practiced, diversity has shrunk, and we try to reintroduce also, crop diversity, so that you increase the diversity, you increase the kind of social safety nets, so that the shocks are also limited and cushioned by the diversity. This is also just highlighting in one community seed bank. We have introduced three community seed banks in different provinces. But this is serving a population of 3,600 households. And in these 3,600 households, we have managed to collect 1,211 accessions of different crops in that kind of small community. The objectives of the seed phase are to create awareness amongst farmers, researchers, policymakers, extension staff, and media on the status of crop diversity within an area, showcasing how farmers are managing community seed banks that are integrated with on-farm crop research, germplasm storage, bulk seed storage, and also storage for seed which they produce for their own seed security, and which is a prerequisite for food sovereignty, because then they are owning this means of crop production, enabling farmers and seed experts to meet and exchange local knowledge and experiences on local crop diversity, conservation management, and utilization, creating opportunities and market linkages for farmers to exchange and or sell farm produce seed between and among themselves, and also the private sector seed industry to interface with them. The other thing we do is, once we have some very good foundation material which the seed companies once multiplied, we have also moved on to do contract seed production by farmers. And there are two reasons: that they get the experience of multiplying good quality seed, and also that they can also get better money than when they sell grain. So we are trying to interface also the kind of with private sector seed industry through contract seed production. Yeah, the next one, please. There's need also to promote traditional knowledge relevant to plant genetic resources for food and agriculture, provide the right to actively participate in sharing the benefits arising from the utilization of plant genetic resources for food and agriculture, which is basically the objectives of the CBD and the international treaty. The right to participate in making decisions at the national, on the national level on matters related to conservation and sustainable use of plant genetic resources. Next one, please. This is showcasing one of the farmers who is growing groundnuts, is growing maize there, and there's beans on the other side. So increasing diversity. In some cases, farmers were growing 2 crops, now they are growing 6 crops. So that diversity, if the other crop fails, they can also get something from there. They won't be totally hungry. So it's very important for livelihood and food security initiatives. In this case, this is the policy discourse. If you look at this, most of the formal sector systems have many kind of legislative, policies in place. But when we look at the farmer side, they don't have anything, The plant breeders have the legal status, the farmers don't have intellectual property rights, no recognition of farmers' intellectual rights. If you look there, they have patents, but on the other farmer side, there's biopiracy on their knowledge and also their seeds. You have also terminator technology. This is also, their farmers are also not even allowed to market some of their seeds. Market access with monopoly, the farmers have no market. They are not even allowed to sell their seed. So when you look at the balance and the scales, they are tilted so much in favor of the other side. But the other side is not also promoting agrobiodiversity. They are promoting monocropping. So there is really a danger. There's also institutional support for research and stuff like that. The farmers don't have received any support from anyone. They actually provide or maintain these agrobiodiversity by their own means, at their own cost. No institutional support of any kind, which is what I think is very, very important to take note of. But these are the materials which the formal sector system survives on when they are looking for genes to actually meditate against certain calamities. We can move on. Now, there is also need to look at the, legislative frameworks and provision for the establishment and function of, and powers of maybe national agrobiodiversity authorities at a national level. We will then come up with the policies and mechanisms to see how agrobiodiversity should be managed and regulated at a national level. Community rights and traditional knowledge is also very key and fundamental to be provided within a policy framework at a national level. Access to biological resources and community knowledge should be based on the peak principle of the CBD. Establishing biological diversity management committees at national and community level is very fundamental, and implementation of the farmers' rights as provided under Article 9 of the International Treaty is very fundamental. And the establishment of a national biodiversity fund. We know that the CBD or the IT promised it, but the resources are not coming. So I think national governments needs to begin to do something in terms of implementing this by their own. Maybe also as civil society we can start something which can showcase the way. Here I'm just showing you that, in this contract seed production with some of the seed companies, the tonnage of seed we have managed to produce with smallholder farmers. So it's not true that farmers can't produce quality seed. They can. And this seed meet all the purity and also the kind of germination percentages which are required by the private sector seed industry. So it is very possible that the point I'm trying to drive here home is that farmers can produce good quality seed which can be marketed anywhere in the world. In any case, probably they produce better seed than even the former sector because it's mechanically produced, but this one is done by hand. So the quality is even much higher. We can debate about seed quality, but I think farmers have the capability. In conclusion, I think it is essential to develop national policies and strategic plans for conserving sustainability of plant genetic resources, promote efforts to conserve biodiversity, also address issues of farmers' rights and farmers' rights realization and domestication should be considered as a key precondition and basis for food and agriculture production in the world. And I think we need to also approach climate change in an integrated approach which looks at soil and water conservation, which looks at also livestock, management and production and market, because the climate is going to change. Some areas which were very good for crops may not be possible in the next 10, 20 years. So what are the livelihoods kind of opportunities which exist in those areas? It may be that we need to integrate livestock production in some of those areas. Soil and water becomes very also key and fundamental. Even in some cases, wildlife management will become key also to begin to think of in terms of ecotourism. These strategies will increase the resilience of vulnerable communities in some of these areas which are threatened by climate change. So if we are going to ensure food security, food sovereignty, agro-biodiversity is the basis, and we need to actually focus more, put more efforts in empowering the communities to manage these key resources which provides livelihoods. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. I think that was, you once again underlined the role of the communities in being the custodians of the seeds, and seeds is the key to food security. But the question to ask would be, having demonstrated this in Zimbabwe, and I'm sure this would find an echo with all the countries, whether it's India or Ethiopia or even in Latin America, that are working with community-based seed banks, how do you actually mainstream these in policies? You've highlighted this as a challenge, but I think this is one question that remains unanswered. What is the role of the state to support these kind of initiatives? What would be the role of markets? You are saying that there's a contract-based system being promoted. I think from our audience and ourselves, we would be interested to come back to that. While now we'll go to the next speaker. I have the pleasure of inviting Sue Edwards. I don't think she needs any introduction. She is the director of Institute of Development Studies in Ethiopia. And the floor is yours now.
Do you press? Hello? There we are. Now we're on. Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be here. And also, it's very nice to see a good colleague from Ethiopia also here. And Andrew and I have crossed paths and know each other for quite a long time. He's in a very fundamental area. I've opted to take a continent-wide view of this issue, because I think that we know that the Green Revolution never penetrated Africa. Now we have Agra trying to bring in the Green Revolution again, and I want to argue that I have no problems with Kofi Annan's motives or the basic principles on which he set up Agra, but unfortunately the piper pays the tune, and where he's getting his money from is a non-sustainable source for African farmers. So what is it that Africa has which mostly is misunderstood or not understood? And I'm very happy that Andrew gave so many specific examples to back up what I want to say. What many people do not realize is that Africa is the second largest continent, that it is highly diverse, that it has a very broad range of agricultural biodiversity, the majority of which is undervalued and poorly studied. We have a young population, so if we can get our education redirected, and we desperately need to redirect our agricultural education and training, we can have young people into this whole process, because the potential for research and development is enormous. Unfortunately, though, we're still suffering from brain drain. We've suffered from brain drain for more than probably 500 years, one way or another. We're still suffering from brain drain. Africa is only seen as a source of extraction. Now we have land grab, but what's that for? Possibly just another form of extraction. And we have very, very poor R&D investment at government level. though I must say that the Ethiopian government is a bit of an exception. 15% of the government budget is focused on agriculture. Most countries of Africa have less than 10%. 10% is the level that the AU has suggested that government should put into their agricultural development. Ethiopia is investing 15%. But we're still a continent riddled by conflicts, and you cannot have development unless you have peace. So we have a push now for the African Green Revolution, and I was very disturbed to read that after the last G20 meeting in America, where some of us signed on for a redirection of some of those funds, basically the basket has been passed to Monsanto, so we know what's coming, or will try to come. Now, what is the situation? I said Africa's diverse. This is a map which was developed in 2001 by FAO, and it's a map of Africa's farming systems. Africa has more than 21 different farming systems, and the colors there show you the diversity. And my background is botany. In 1983, a British botanist produced a map of Africa's, he calls them endemic regions, regions where there are plants peculiar to those regions. And if we go between the two, if you go from here, look at the lovely green-blue in the middle. That's what Jonathan Kingdom calls Africa's great green belly. It's Congo Basin. And look, you see? It's also an area of high endemicity in knowledge, in plants, etc. Surrounded on one side by the Atlantic, but on the other with the diversity that's with the highlands going up the rift, the Great African Rift. So diversity is the norm, as Andrew has indicated, helping to build up diversity. Most African smallholder farmers are growing 10 or more crops. These smallholders are mostly women, who are ignored by extension. 4 farming systems dominate Africa: maize mixed, cereal, root crop mixed. Now, who does much research on root crops? We had to push for years, didn't we, Mariam, to get NSET into our program in Ethiopia. Yeah. And then agropastoral and millet sorghum. These 4 systems provide the livelihoods for half of the population and occupy 42% of the land. And most of these also, the most important cereal is not maize. Maize is a Latin American crop developed for a relatively humid environment. Sorghum is Africa's crop, and this is a fraction of the diversity collected from Ethiopia. Ethiopia is part of the sorghum genetic diversity route. And in the 1970s, IDRC of Canada was promoting and supporting research. Now, sorghum is only being actually researched at Makerere University to provide seed materials for America to feed their cattle. Right. So what do we need? We don't need a green revolution for Africa. We need a brown revolution for Africa. It was Warren Buffett's son, Humphrey Buffett, who said at the World Food Prize last year, or maybe a year ago, with Monsanto sitting on the front bench, we need a brown revolution. And he's a professional photographer. We need to do something about Africa's soils. Otherwise, we can't build up the crop base either. So that is what we've done in Ethiopia. The Ethiopian government has now mainstreamed the making and use of compost into the extension system. All farmers with mixed cropping are making and using compost. What does compost do for the soil? Well, it builds up the nutrients, and it can double yields in 4 years. You can recover a degraded soil with the right use of compost in 4 years, 4 to 5 years. And this is what we have shown with data from farmers' fields. This is over 7 years. The middle column is compost. Compost is cumulative. It's not in this year. You can't pay for it next year, so you don't get the responses. Now, once you put compost in the soil, you'll continue to benefit from it. And you don't necessarily have to go back. Some farmers have told us every 4 years is good enough. But we say not every year. You can overdo it. But every other year, third year, and you can maintain a very good soil. And this is because HIVOS is sponsoring the IIED delegation, of which I'm a member here. We're very grateful to them. And HIVOS and SNV of the Netherlands is promoting an unspoken of alternate energy, the promotion of biogas in Africa. And we are involved in the use of the bioslurry. This is to show you the impact after just 1 year of using bioslurry compost. On the right is the normal kind of yield from a farmer's fields. And the chemical fertilizer and the compost is giving similar, but the compost is already starting to show better. And the most interesting thing, when I looked at the data that came out of this data set, was the impact on grain index. Now, Norman Borlaug made his name out of changing the relationship between stem and grain head in wheats, his dwarf wheats. But that's not the only thing you could do genetically. You can do it by good nutrition, which compost has shown. And the 3 top crops from our own research is durum wheat. Ethiopia is a genetic resource center for durum wheat now in the world. 34 to 39% of the total biomass goes into grain. You still get more straw. Maize is 33 to 43%, just based on compost. And sorghum, 35 to 41%. Teff, our iconic crop, also goes up, 32 to 36%. So a farmer is getting more grain for less money, actually. He only needs to put, or she, effort into the thing. Luckily, we've at last, through UNCTAD and various pressure groups, the African Union has now adopted a decision to support organic farming for Africa. But how to do this? We don't have too much information on this yet, but this is, as it says, that initiate and provide guidance for an African Union-led coalition of international partners on the establishment of an African organic farming platform. And one of the things I am here for over these 2 weeks is to be in the IIED group saying, yes, this is what we should do. And so this is the full wording of that declaration. So why is it important? Because we have therefore initiated a group of CSOs, including BioVision, my own Institute for Sustainable Development, with support from SSNC and now also the Swiss Development Fund, SDC. We're initiating an ecological organic agriculture initiative for Africa with 6 pillars. I have the first pillar sitting on my head, which is a bit heavy, but still. These are the 6 pillars. And we want to make a change. We're just getting going, though. We're only just getting going, getting off the ground. Therefore, we need to invest in the ecological intensification of Africa's agriculture. not its industrial intensification, but its ecological intensification. We need to, I'm so happy, Andrew, you talked about the problems of intellectual property rights and the need for farmers' rights. This is absolutely essential. We should fight for this right across Africa and with the African Union. And we must show that Africa can feed itself, and Africa could be a food basket for many other parts of the world. But we cannot do that unless we have peace and security. So please, all these meddling agrochemicals and oil companies and things that play under the table politics have to be shut up. This presentation is largely based on a chapter that Dr. Twaldi and I wrote called Africa's Potential for Ecological Intensification, and it's published in a book which FAO printed, but it was produced by FAO, Third World Network, and my institute called Climate Change and Food Systems Resilience. It's available as a PDF download through the FAO Organic webpage. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue, for this very interesting presentation. We couldn't agree more that Africa needs a brown revolution, not a green one. I think many parts of the world would agree with that as well. And it's even more heartening to know that African Union has set up a platform to support and promote ecological agriculture. I think in the years to come, we will be following this process closely, and maybe that's something for the rest of the world to learn from. I mean, what happens out of it. It's my pleasure to invite the next speaker. It's Dr. Abate Hatemaram. He's the Executive Director of Sustainable Land Use Forum from Ethiopia. And he would be talking about promotion of indigenous agroforestry practices to tackle climate change. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just concentrate on some pictures to elaborate my presentation, and actually mine is complementary to what Sue Edwards has said. In Africa, we have indigenous, really not well explored practices which can really solve the major problem of the planet, like climate change. And I will try to share with the experience of one community, that is Gedio community. So they have indigenous agroforestry practice. If shared across the country itself, across Africa, and even to the rest of the world, it can really contribute its part to mitigate the problem of climate change. So these are some of the areas which I'm going to touch. Can you please? This is the... Okay. Why are we concentrating on agroforestry? I think this is a very vivid fact. Agroforestry is sustainable, unlike monoculture. It promotes agricultural development while responding to climate change, both for adaptation and mitigation, and reduce loss of natural capital and resources. That is what professionals in the area say. But from policy, there is a challenge in the premise that agroforestry or indigenous agroforestry really cannot address the problem of food security. It's not productive. There is that argument, there is that assertion, but we'll see how that assertion is true. This is the downward arrow is this one? Left and right. this is left forward. Sure. Why do we promote indigenous agroforestry? As we see this small farmer, as Sue was saying, the system is really self-sustaining. This is a Gedio indigenous agroforester. He is using the byproducts of his agroforestry for fertilizing his soil. By so doing, I think that is what we mean. Instead of green revolution, brown revolution. The farmer is doing his brown revolution. And look, Ethiopia is a mountainous country, and we lost most of our fertile soils due to land degradation, also erosion. And look, what the Gedio agroforestry practice is doing. When you say indigenous agroforestry is really addressing or tackling climate change, if you see the hut there, that is the Gedio hut. Sorry, that one. So if one travels through the Gedio agroforestry system, you can't see the village or the farmland. Instead, you will see forests. But if you explore and walk inside, you will see the village and also the farmlands. And so the farmer is producing his food and also his livestock products, his plant and livestock products. Where is this place really? If we see the map of Africa, Ethiopia is in the Horn of Africa, and Gedo is located somewhere here. This is the Great Rift Valley, dissecting the country into the Eastern Highland and the Western Highlands, and the Gedo agroforestry is located here. You will imagine the population density is 1,000 to 1,500 people per kilometer square, but in the highland Ethiopia, which is said to be relatively advanced in agriculture, the carrying capacity is maximum is 178 people per kilometer square. And this agroforestry system, the Gedo indigenous agroforestry system, is supporting about 3 million people. So it's a practice of 3 million people really. And it was there for thousands of years. What are the elements of the indigenous agroforestry system? It is dissected into 3 stories. The upper story is the upper canopy is the shade trees like Milicia, Albizia, Cordia africana, and Croton. And in the middle story you will find the fruit crops like Inset, which is the pacemaker of the indigenous agroforestry system, and it is also they call it a water tanker. So during the dry season, it is the insect which is feeding the rest of the plants. And coffee arabica, major export crop of the country, it is found in the middle story of the agroforestry system. In the lower story or the floor, you will find herbaceous annual crops, root crops and vegetables, and faunal agroforests like livestock and beehiving. So in a very small unit of land, you will find you can produce and maximize your production. So this is practically how it looks. This is the upper story where the trees are used for shade, and in the middle story you will find the pacemaker, the insect, where about 12 million people in Ethiopia are depending on, and it is